Hey, everybody, this is episode 12 of the Latent Force Prepared Defensive Action podcast. This is part one of our four-part series for new gun owners. And in this episode, Mike and I explain the 4 rules of gun safety, and we also go into the how-tos of selecting a handgun that works for your personal defense plan. So stick around.
Mission 3, 2, 1. This is the Latent Force Prepared Defensive Action podcast.
We believe there's no defensive situation so bad that your lack of training can make it worse. We're on a mission to cut the crap in the firearms industry and bring you topics and discussions that are designed to make you a more informed and effective gunfighter. If it has to do with alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and everything else, we're going to talk about it. Guys, gals, and submarine racers, here are your hosts, Jay Eisenicke and Mike Garza.
Well, welcome everybody. Welcome back to episode 12 of the Latent Force Prepared Defensive Action podcast. My name's Jay Eisenicke, and with me is everyone's favorite co-host with the most, Mike Garza. How are you, Mike?
Well, I'm not dead yet. COVID didn't kill me, so I must be doing something right.
Damn, look at you. That's right. Yeah, well, you know, you probably ran out. I can tell you probably ran out and got your vaccine right away, didn't you?
Right
First
away.
in line?
I was first in line. Actually, I kicked the doctor out of the way, and I took the syringe and just pumped it right into my noggin.
There you go. There you go. Hey, you know, and you started this out and it reminds me, I know how much you love to watch television. And so I was watching a new show the other day. It was called Black Summer. Now, I'm not normally a zombie apocalypse type of person, but, you know, I was like, what the hell? I couldn't find anything else on Netflix and I was home alone. So I figured I'd watch it. So, and it reminds me every time that when I see stuff like that, I posted a picture up. If you remember, and this is very, very much reminds me of that. If you remember that in I Am Legend with Will Smith, and he goes into that building with his AR and he's got his light on and he goes around that corner and all those whatever they are, zombies or whatever, are all huffing and standing in a circle in the dark, you know, and he tries to sneak out of there. That's what I feel like when I go into a room with a bunch of vaccinated people.
Wait a minute. Will Smith had an AR in his hand? He hates guns.
I know. So did Mark Wahlberg and Liam Neeson and who's the latest clown to speak out? It was the Bourne guy. What's his
Jason
face?
Bourne? I don't know what his name is.
Yeah, whatever.
I just remember Tommy yelling at all his cast for not wearing masks. I thought that was hilarious.
Who was that?
Tom Cruise. When he was yelling at all his cast.
No, wait a minute. Tom Cruise had a meltdown? Come on now. Yeah, no. Whatever. Well, hey, you know, I know we're always dumping, or most people are dumping on the city of Chicago, and it's usually about bad things, you know, like there are massive amounts of crime and every weekend, you know, 500 people get shot or whatever it is. So I thought I would share some rainbows and sunshines over there in Chicago. And so as I was just around the internet doing whatever it is that I normally do, I came across a fantastic story about, I don't know if you saw this video, Mike, but it's called Badass Cat Leaps from 5th Floor of Burning Building and then struts off like a boss. So have you seen that one?
I have seen that one. That is a badass cat.
I seriously just like, you know, have you ever seen that video with the cat? Oh, what's that song? I'm trying to think of what it is. Sail?
Oh yeah.
Have you ever, and that cat just like jumps out the window and to this. That's exactly what that reminded me of. Somebody has got to be making a video of that to that song.
That's got to be at least more than one life that cat gives up.
You think so?
Yeah, maybe two or three.
That was a threefer.
Now listen, I don't want to be part of false news. So 500 people shot is a little over the top. It's only 58 and only 5 died.
Okay, all right. I should. That's right. They're all the fact checkers that are out there. I'm going to get us in trouble.
That's right.
So it says a black cat had the luckiest moment of her 9 lives this week when she leaped from the 5th floor of a burning building in Chicago, and then it just landed so softly right next to the car and just took off. It was fantastic. So it encourages many people to just don't worry. It's nice. It was 5 stories. You'll be fine.
I encourage a lot of people to try that to see if you live.
Yeah, there's a certain number of people that probably should give that a go. Anyways, so another thing, and I know, one of the things that is really, really annoying is social media and how it's like we think anything that's going on in the world is important, has to go into like important moments. So I happened to see this other stupid thing that happened the other day so the Pope, which if you're Catholic or not, you know who the Pope is, right? And so the guys, like the Holy of Holies and everything's very serious. I just can't imagine that, the Pope is, when the doors are closed and the cameras are off, that he's kicking back, smoking a cigar, drinking whiskey and telling dirty jokes. I just can't picture that. And I also can't imagine that the Pope gives 2 shits about what's happening in the DC universe. Or maybe it's a Marvel universe. I don't even know. But apparently some guy, you know what I decided, Mike? I'm going to make either a mug or a T-shirt. And on it, it's going to say apparently. So anybody that's listened to this long enough is going to know why. So it turns out is that a guy dressed up like Spiderman was compelled to introduce himself to the Pope. So what do you think about that?
Well, in all fairness, he was actually there to see the children at the hospital.
Oh, it's for the children.
But, however, yes, I find that very odd that he decides, let's go meet the dude with the little white hat. At least he looks like a valid Spider-Man. Like he's not a fat Spider-Man, he's like hanging out of his costume or anything. So I'll give him props for that.
Well, yeah, like when you're down on Fremont Street and you see overweight, fat Kiss.
Yeah. Like you can see his beard coming out from underneath the mask down there on Vegas.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't know Spider-Man had a beard.
Exactly. Yeah. So, so I'll give you that. At least it wasn't one of those Las Vegas on Fremont Street types of costumes. So, okay, he's all right.
Since we're on that topic real quick. So, Mike, when we were there just to enjoy it, I forget what hotel has the beach, the pool that has the wave generator. So I took my kids there so that I could gamble. And then during the day we'd go there and the kids could have fun. But we did walk around a little bit and they saw like Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse. And my kid, this was when they were younger, they go to me, why does Mickey Mouse look weird? Like, cause they can't spend the money on the good costumes.
Right.
So I'm like, dude, that's not Mickey Mouse. That's his uncle, Ricky the Rat. So it's pretty close, but no cigar.
Ricky the Rat.
Ricky the Rat.
Nice. Yeah, I think there's a video out there. I'm gonna have to look that one up. Where wasn't it like Mickey Mouse and Superman or Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck or something like that getting a fight out on Las Vegas Boulevard?
Oh, I'm sure there's several of those.
It was like a total throwdown. It was awesome. Yeah, I'll have to look that one up. So. Well, I'd love to continue talking about random BS on the internet and stuff like that, but unfortunately, or fortunately, people usually tune in to hear some things about guns and self-defense and all that kind of stuff. So I thought I would go to, if you remember back, this must have been last year, maybe a year and a half ago, we talked about in one of our episodes was the Montana Firearms Freedom Act back in 2010 that passed. And basically that was a law that had passed that anything that was manufactured within the state of Montana was exempt from or they weren't going to enforce any of the federal firearms laws if it was manufactured and stayed and was within the borders of the state of Montana. And then, went through some legal challenges. And then in 2014 or 2016, ultimately it got overturned. And then the Supreme Court said, yeah, we don't even want to hear it. So they basically lost their fight. And what I remember most vividly about that conversation that you and I had at the time was that you said that the only way that it was going to ever happen, because there were other multiple states. I mean, it was like Alaska, Arizona, Utah, a couple other cities or states had tried to enforce that. Is that one of your comments was you're going to have a governor or district or a attorney general that's going to have the balls to enforce, the laws. And so I thought it was interesting because not too long ago, here about a week ago, Governor Abbott in the state of Texas signed in 7 new laws into the state of Texas. And I'm sure you know all about that, right?
I do a little bit anyways. What I hear in the news, which is not much. So,
well, you don't watch the news. You don't watch TV. You don't have a TV.
You know what? Here you go. I'll prop out Fox right now. I don't watch a lot of news, but I do watch Gutfeld. That's pretty much the only. And I don't want to say it's news, it's more comedy, but that's where I get my news from. That's about it.
Well, I mean, he's pretty good. I mean, I get you. Yeah, he's pretty good to watch. Well, anyways, so what was cool about this is that they had 7 different bills that came through that he signed in on the same day. And so there was, most notably, there was Senate Bill 19, which prohibits any governmental entity from contracting with any business that discriminates against firearms and ammunition businesses or organizations. So I thought that one was pretty nice. So,
yep. Well, that's probably a good thing since we don't have any ammunition right now.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, you get a lot of these where I know at the time I used to use Square when I would do money, and then they stopped allowing, they would not, you couldn't basically use their services if you were tied to anything that had to do with firearms. And so there's a lot of companies that do that. And so that here it is basically they're just saying if you're going to discriminate against anybody that does that, then the government of the state of Texas is not going to do it. So that's a good one. Yay, team. The next one was Senate Bill 20, and that one allows guests that are traveling, like coming into the state, allows guests to store their firearms in their hotel rooms. So apparently in Texas, it must have been, prior to this, must have been illegal to store your thing in your hotel room, I guess. Do you know?
That I do not know, and I find that one extremely odd. So not being a lawyer or anything, when you lease a hotel room from the company, I mean, that becomes your new home, right? It's an extension of your home. So I find that very odd that was in Texas, allegedly the most free state in the country.
Yeah. So basically it's kind of like your car is that you get that castle doctrine. Basically it transfers with you into your car, and you would think that it would be the same in a hotel room, but I guess maybe they must add some sort of loophole and this closed it up.
Yeah.
But then they also had Senate Bill 550, which removes the shoulder or belt holster requirements, allowing Texans to carry firearms in whatever kind of holster they choose. Now, I was not aware of that. That one, I always thought that was pretty interesting, that they actually had stuff on the books that was telling you how you had to actually carry your gun.
See, this whole time I've been making fun of Texas as the whole free state and thing. I have been carrying without a CCW in Arizona for I don't know how long. And Texas has had CCW carry, and you couldn't even open carry unless you had taken the CCW class. Oh, by the way, in Texas, until all these bills came in here. So yeah, for them to restrict what kind of holster you can carry. Hey,
crazy.
What if I'm in my air suit, and I want to have my shoulder holster on?
Well, that would have been okay because it removes the shoulder or belt holster requirement. So if you were in your Space Force onesie and you had your shoulder holster on, you would have been okay in the state of Texas. But if you try to stick it in, in that flap in the back in the belt or whatever, you'd have been arrested. Would have thrown you on the ground.
Unbelievable.
But what I find interesting is do you remember that video that Instructor Zero did where he stuck a sock in his belt and he used it as a holster?
Perfect. What could go wrong?
I wonder if that one would have flown. I wonder, it was a belt holster.
I haven't even heard too much about Instructor Zero. Is he still alive?
I don't know. I think so. I heard Dave Laird over there at DCS was doing something, took a class with him, or was having him come out.
Yeah, he did take a class with him a while ago, but that was pre-COVID, so I don't know. If COVID took him out. Yeah. So if COVID hasn't taken you out, we would like emails from everybody. And Jay likes cats, so please feel free to send all the cat pictures and videos to Jay's email. He will provide it for you later at the end of the show.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to provide you Jay at latentforce.com. Like, I'm going to do that. Please, if you have other comments, you can send them to podcast at latentforce.com, but don't send cat pictures. Come on. All right. So the next one was House Bill 957, which repeals the criminal offense of possessing, manufacturing, transporting, or repairing a firearm silencer. And it also ensures that any firearm suppressor manufactured in Texas and that remains in Texas will not be subject to federal law or federal regulation. So that one has got to be tied somehow. I'm just curious how that one's going to shake out, because that was a Firearms Freedom Act that they had already tested up in there in Montana that got overturned, and the Supreme Court didn't even want to hear it.
Right.
But my point on that one back when we had that discussion was there's got to be somebody that's looking at this like it is with recreational marijuana.
Right.
Because that's the same deal. I mean, it is absolutely actually, to me, it's actually a stronger position because there is not an amendment specific to using drugs. But there is an amendment specific to the right to bear arms. So I would think that legal challenges, you would think that you'd be able to actually, this one would stand up, especially if they're allowing recreational marijuana use is a federally regulated, Schedule I drug that's regulated by the federal government, but they're allowing it in states, within state lines and state borders. So we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah. And, I haven't, because it's Texas and I don't live in Texas and I really don't care. I haven't read that bill in its entirety. However, in this little excerpt that I pulled, it doesn't say any federal government entity. So I wonder if they're going to, I don't know. It seems very hokey. The language in law is everything. If your I's are not dotted and your T's are not crossed, they're gonna rip it apart. So I'd like to see this eventually. It's going to have to get contested eventually. And like you said, whether the Supreme Court sees it or not will be another thing.
Because it says in there, will not be subject to federal law or federal regulation.
Okay, so it does say that in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that seems like they're taking a pretty solid stand on that. So it'll be interesting to see, because I think is that if you're able to do that in Texas, that'll lead the way for sure in all these other states that were already able to get that done. So
just remember, the ATF doesn't like it when you start tampering with their money.
Yeah. Well, those tax stamps, they're making what, $300 a pop? That's not very much money.
200.
I think they're making the money on prosecuting you and fining you. That's where they make their money.
Well, they should talk to Hunter Biden. He would know all about that.
He should. Exactly. And you told me not to bring up anything about politics, and here you are. You gave me this warning before we even started. You said, I'm going to go ballistic on anybody and not.
Hey, when somebody buys a gun illegally and then they're talking about illegal, they're going after gun stores now that allegedly, give me a break. Here's a guy that clearly broke the law. Are you kidding me? I guess everyone needs a Secret Service person in your back pocket to go retrieve the gun that you threw away in the trash. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. So here's another one, House Bill 1500, where it prevents any government entity from prohibiting the sale or transportation of firearms or ammunition during a declared disaster or emergency. So that's kind of interesting, is that I know that a lot of the time that would happen during a natural disaster where they would prohibit you from being able to move, because obviously for security reasons, so you wouldn't be able to move your firearms or your ammunition. And so here now they've rolled that back.
Yeah.
Then there's House Bill 1927, which authorizes constitutional carry in Texas.
Yay, welcome to the 21st century.
Exactly. Meaning law-abiding Texans can legally carry a handgun without a license to carry. And then House Bill 2622, the last one, makes Texas a Second Amendment sanctuary state by protecting Texans from new federal gun control regulations. So that additionally will be interesting. I'm not familiar, and I'd be interested to see, and we could probably feverishly type away and find it, but I'm curious if there are any other Second Amendment sanctuary states that are, have a law passed that way.
Yeah, and again, so see, I have just little excerpts from these bills, but this one completely states Texans from new federal gun. So notice that that's only Texans. So let's say you're visiting from Texas, and you're not a Texan yet. Where's the transition? Let's say I have a job in Texas. Am I a Texan, or am I still, just an Arizonian from, visiting Texas? And will I be protected from that? So can I buy a suppressor made in Texas and keep it at my buddy's house in Texas?
Great question. I'm going to go with the fact that if you go to Texas and you have to ask if you're a Texan,
I don't think they allow dirty Mexicans there.
And the Texans they're gonna tell you whether you're Texan or not. So I would think, but I don't know.
All I have to do is put one of those shirts on with a state and a star, and I'm good to go.
Is that it? That's all you got to do?
That's it.
Okay. I thought it was all you had to do is tuck your boots or your pants into your boots.
That'll never happen.
Okay.
Even Mexican cowboys don't do that, for the record.
Well, I spent some time working in the oil field and stuff, and around Texas and the western states and up to Montana, and the guys that came from Texas, they always had their pants stuffed in their
That is
boots.
The dumbest thing I have ever heard in my life. All the sand, all the oil, it goes right down your pants into your boots. Why would you do that?
I don't know. They're from Texas. I don't know. So interesting stuff there. Anyways, I think it'll be good in a way, is that maybe we'll get maybe it'll turn into some things for everybody else. It's kind of the hope, I guess, but we'll see. But one of the other interesting things, and I posted this up on our Facebook page, is the number of during this COVID time and the change of administration from Trump to Biden, and then all the riots going on, is there's been a massive, massive run, as we all know, on guns and ammunition. And the latest number there's millions upon millions of new gun owners, which is good, and it is also extremely scary.
I don't remember any riots. I remember peaceful protests.
Oh, that's right. We should have known better than to say anything about riots. God, man, they're going to shut us down. The Clintons are going to come after. I'm actually surprised that we're still around, because we did mention something about the Clintons last episode with Rich about the guy who was who brought up the whole meeting on the tarmac, and he was found that he had committed suicide maybe a week or so ago. So that was kind of interesting, and we brought it up and mentioned anything. I thought for sure the Clintons be knocking on my door. But according to the National Shooting Sports Foundation, nearly 5 million Americans purchased a firearm for the very first time in 2020. 5 million Americans. And they surveyed firearms retailers, which reported that 40% of sales were conducted to purchasers who have never previously owned a firearm. So basically, we're getting pretty close there, is that 50% of the people that are buying guns right now, pretty dang close, have never had one before. So what it raised to me is that I think that the problem, I shouldn't say the problem, the concern for me is that we have a bunch of people that are getting guns, and probably, if they've never owned one before, don't have a real solid understanding of some of the things that go with owning a firearm. So I thought, we've talked about it. You and I have mentioned this. We had talked about some of these things over the course of our previous podcast, but I thought this would be a good time to put together a series of podcasts specific to the new gun owners so they can kind of have a place. Maybe we can talk about some of the stuff that's important for new gun owners to understand. So if that's cool with you, Mike.
I guess. It seems like we always do these things usually after, I don't know, either presidents change or different times in the United States, whatever what's going on. But I guess we can go over them again.
Okay. Well, we won't, so our thought was as we go into some of the things about, first off is just basics things which have to do with, guns, gun selection, talking about ammo and caliber and, gear and concealment and talking about training and the right kind of trainers or teachers, drills, and then get into some things, that has to do with maybe mindset and then understanding about how a firearm is a tool of last resort and just kind of cover that over that. We're not going to talk about all that stuff today, but over the next 4 or 5 podcasts, we figure we talk about all that stuff if that's cool to get started with you.
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So first of all, in my opinion, anytime you go anywhere or any class or anything, you always need to know what the firearm safety rules are. So anybody, they call them the Cardinal rules for a reason. They're that important. And I think that the number one thing that every new gun owner needs to know and needs to know very well is the firearm safety rules. Now, some will say there's 5, some will say there's 6, but to me, the 4 basic ones are going to be all guns are loaded. Always point your muzzle in a safe direction. Keep your finger straight along the frame until you're on target and ready to fire. And then number 4 is be sure of your target and surroundings. So, I just think that if you are a new gun owner, that has got to be something that is just super, super critical for you to understand.
Yeah. It's funny. So these, again, like Jay says, these are the 4 cardinal rules. Now, I agree now, especially with the new gun owners, that we should almost add a 5th one under the cardinal rules. And the 5th one should be make sure that your gun is not accessible to a bad guy whenever you're not around your gun, right? Like if you carry your gun 24/7 on your hip, okay, then that rule shouldn't be there for you. However, that's a little impractical. So as a new gun owner, you should really have a safe that's bolted to your house wall or that you can't lift it up. You can't, otherwise you gave the bad guy a carrying box, so make sure that it's secured somewhere. But I agreed. If you're trying not to hurt anybody, these 4 cardinal rules, the basic ones, are what will protect you from, death or severe loss of limb or whatever.
Right. And I think the most, number 1 is that no matter what, whenever you're handling a gun, is that you've got to look at that and realize is that your mental thing about that. And there'll be some questions. I've heard other people say, we can graduate to the point that we should be able to just handle a gun without thinking that it's loaded. But I think for for a brand new gun owner is every time you're handling a gun, you need to assume and handle it like it's loaded. And if you have that mindset when you're handling it, then the rest of the rules kind of make more sense. If it's loaded and you're going to put that muzzle in a safe direction, and a safe direction is not pointing it at your cat. It's not pointing it in the living room. It's thinking about where that bullet's going to go if it actually fires. And then I think the one thing that does the worst thing for us is cartoons and movies. And I see it all the time is people running around, walking around with their finger on the trigger. And I think that's what people think, that's just the normal place where you put your finger. And the reality is it should be straight along the frame. And we've always said this in our classes is that if you have your finger, putting your finger on the trigger should be weird. And you spend more time with your finger along the frame than you do actually on the trigger. Even if you're out in a class that, you shoot 500 rounds, you spend more time with your finger straight along the frame. So it's just one of those things that you need to get, familiar with. And then thinking about those targets and surroundings, what's behind it, what's in front of it, especially when it's in your house, and what's down the hallway behind the door, is you need to be thinking about that stuff for sure.
Absolutely.
So one of the next thing that comes up to my mind about a lot of the stuff is, we've talked about in the past about these, unfortunate stories about somebody got shot. I remember the one we were talking about in the gun range in Texas, where the guy in the parking lot was just showing up to go shoot his gun, and the guy working at the range was messing with a gun, and he fired it into the parking lot and hit the guy and killed him out in the parking lot. And so these rules are in place for a reason. And the reason that things go wrong is for two main reasons. One is you're either careless, which to me is just being complacent. You know the rules and you fail to follow them. And I think the next one is that you're just is where we're trying to prevent is for new gun owners is ignorance. And I don't say that in a bad way to call people ignorant, but it's just ignorance of these rules, and just having a basic lack of understanding of how to handle and operate their firearms, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like one of those things like, okay, are you going to let your 8-year-old drive the car today just because? I mean, again, I get it. I don't know why people don't make the correlation. I mean, a handgun will end your life without even thinking about it. It's a tool. It doesn't know. It doesn't care. It's an inanimate object. Because you're ignorant of that fact, that's what gets new gun owners into problems. They don't understand how it works. One, they don't understand whether there's one in the pipe or not in the pipe. And then they just go ahead and, oh, well, I think I checked it last, and they press the trigger, and then, they get a bang instead of a click. So, yeah, I agree. Ignorance is just same thing with the law, right? Ignorance of the law is not a defense. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that, it's interesting that we talk about how guns go off. When we talk about how guns go off is because I think that if you're not familiar with guns, and if you don't treat it like it's loaded, you don't point it in a safe direction, and you don't keep your finger off the trigger, then these are how you make a gun go off. It's pretty simple. Is that there's intentional, right? Is that you actually put your finger on the trigger, you point it at the target, and you fire. It goes off. It's intentional. That's what you meant for it to do. And then you have accidental types, which is where, like, there's a malfunction of your gun, something of that, an outside force, like you get something that gets jammed into the trigger guard as you're holstering it.
A gazinta.
What is a gazinta?
A gazinta, that's on the bottom of your jacket. Those little things that you can pull to make your jackets tight.
Yeah.
And then the little gazinta goes in there, and then you push down on the gun. You're like, hey, it's not going down. Let me push harder, because that makes sense. So you push harder, and then the gazinta goes into the trigger, and then you get a bang.
Right, and then there's the voluntary, the unintentional ones where you're messing with your gun. Let's say you need to press the trigger to just take apart your Glock, and so you press the trigger. You didn't intend for it to fire, but you press the trigger. You didn't make sure it was empty, and it fires. And so you did everything. It would be an unintentional thing. And then there is some that are just basic, have to do with the way that, if you think about this, is if you're startled and you jump and something happens, your first thing is to flinch. And so that flinching action, if you have your finger on the trigger, that can cause the gun to go off. Additionally, is you can have a sympathetic response, which a lot of people don't even understand, is that if you have your finger on the trigger and you go and you pull and pick up something heavy with your opposite hand, is that sympathetic grip is you're going to squeeze with both hands, and so you're going to squeeze that trigger. And the next one would be is like if you're walking along and you trip over something, your balance gets messed up, you're going to go kind of throw your hands out or something to catch your balance. That balance disruption is also a way that you can make that gun go off.
Agreed.
But I mean, to me, is that really ultimately, I think, is that what we need to be paying attention to is that you have an intentional action to fire your gun, and then you have a discharge that is, to me, any of those three things that happen is because you're being negligent. And I just don't think that there should be, it's either intentional or negligent.
Yeah.
What say you?
Yeah, I mean the mechanical as well. I mean, you've neglected the maintenance on your gun, and therefore the mechanical happens. I get it. It might not be 100%, but I mean, it's pretty close. If you haven't had your gun inspected by an armor every year, then you're negligent. I mean, that's again. This is do you change the oil in your car? Do you change the brakes in your car? Do you do maintenance on your car? It's the same thing. You should be doing maintenance on your firearm, especially if you carry it to save the life of yourself or your family or anyone that's around you, right?
When we were talking earlier about kids and children getting access to the guns and things happen, and obviously, kids can can hurt themselves or another child, is that, this happens to adults too. I mean, the majority of things that happen with adults because they don't even understand how these guns work. And so, but I think it's important as a new gun owner is that they start thinking is that if you are choosing to bring a gun into your house and it becomes part of your personal protection plan, then you have to be aware and you have to start thinking about guns like a kid. And I say that is that you got to think it from their perspective, is because kids are very, very curious about guns. They're in cartoons and they just think it's kind of a fun mess around type of thing. And, in the Looney Tunes thing, how many times does Elmer Fudd shoot Daffy Duck and, nothing happens. So, it's just this kind of, and with Yosemite Sam.
Actually, I think they've canceled Yosemite Sam now. I don't think that's available on TV anymore.
I'm sitting here aging myself. I'm going, who the hell watches Looney Tunes anymore? But I think that, I think here's the reality is that 45% of the nation's households have firearms. Let that sink in. New gun owners, people out there, 45% of the households in America have a gun in it. And
I would argue that number is a little higher. That's just the statistics from the ATF/FBI.
And so here's the thing is that you can stick your head in the sand and you can act like, I'm just not going to have guns in my house and I'm not going to do any of this and I'm not going to allow this to happen. But the reality is that 50% of the houses, almost 50%, and I'm with you, Mike. I think it's higher than 50%. But at least this statistic says that 45%, almost every other house has guns in it. So if you are not, my opinion is that what parents should be doing, whether they believe in firearms or not, is they should be bulletproofing their kids in the way that they understand about guns. Gun-proof your kids. Don't kid-proof guns. That's kind of where I'm stand on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when my kids were old enough to put on earmuffs, we took them to a range, and it wasn't me because they're not going to listen to Dad, but they are going to listen to some stranger that has a 12-gauge shotgun that shoots a milk jug downrange. So we took them out there to a gun safety class, and we let them teach them or show them the dangers of guns. And then after they've completed that, then I started interjecting, my ideas on what gun safety should be. And all my kids, all three of them, they all understand it. They all respect it. And they know exactly what to do when they're at someone else's house or when their friends come over here and my safe might happen to be open, and they look in and they know to keep an eyeball on their friends to make sure that they don't, touch anything. And then they also, even more, they also know the combos to my safe to lock them up. Because I'm getting older and I am getting more senile.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a good point. Is that if your kids understand how guns work and what the safety steps are, what the safety rules are, and you've taught it to them, they may not be big gun fans and they might not like to go out to the range all the time because it happens. Not everybody has the same mindset. Is at least they know. Is that they know that they're not supposed to do this. They know they're not supposed to do that. And if they see somebody doing it, then they know that they need to either say something or leave the area and get out of there and tell somebody else. Because I think part of the problem too is that, man, you look at some of these toy guns nowadays. I mean, and even airsoft guns and everything else, it's pretty damn hard to tell the difference between a real gun and a toy gun in a lot of areas. I know the little red or orange end is supposed to be, but if that isn't on there or if it's covered up, that looks like a real gun. And I just think if we're treating it like it's toys and we're not handling and approaching, if you don't know if it's real or not, everybody, parents and kids, need to be treating it like it is a real gun, even if they don't know if it is or not, right?
Yeah, especially those airsoft guns. My oldest kid, he plays airsoft religiously now, and I mean the mag changes, the feel, the weight of those airsoft guns are incredible. I mean, I get the reason why some people choose to use them as trainers, even though, in my opinion, you really shouldn't. And I get it. I mean, if you pointed that thing in the middle of the night, you'd get the real stuff from me in return in several rounds of succession.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, I don't doubt that. So I think that with parents, if you're going to have kids and you're going to bring a gun in, you're a new gun owner, is that you need to get some training and start taking a firearm safety class. One of the really bad things, in my opinion, that has changed since the 50s and 60s is they used to have firearms classes in the classroom at schools. They used to do hunter safety courses and all those type of things in the schools. Back when people weren't afraid of, everything that moved and everything that somebody said, it didn't hurt their feelings. They used to be okay with that. And so as parents and new gun owners, you need to go out and seek some training on the basics of firearm safeties. And the one thing, and I will say about the NRA, is that they have the Eddie Eagle program, which I think is probably one of the better ones that's out there. It's even difficult to get that into schools, but usually law enforcement will put those on, bring them into the schools, and teach gun safety. And if you're a parent and a new gun owner, you should be demanding that in your schools when all the kids get back to school anyways, is get that training with the kids so they understand it.
Well, I could even go one further, going back real quick to the airsoft gun. My wife teaches now, and I won't say where she teaches because I'm sure that school will get canceled. But one of the programs there is law enforcement / I forget, security or maybe law, whatever it is. And the officer that teaches that's the first thing she says is they were doing training and the kids were with airsoft. And the first thing the kids realized was, oh, it's just airsoft. It's fun. So, she asked me, well, what can I do to break that? I go, just go to UTMs. Because UTM is not fun to get hit with. Universal Training Marker, I think is what the munitions, I think is what the name of it is. And, it's little lipstick rounds and they hurt like the dickens. And that's the point. The point is it's not supposed to be fun like airsoft. It's supposed to train you, in the correct methods of whatever it is that you're doing. So yeah, she's going to switch to that. And then I immediately told her, oh yeah, by the way, those are still categorized as a firearm. So good luck with the ATF.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. They are a firearm, just different. They fire a different round, and the UTMs are awesome. Yeah. So this will be the last point on here that has to do with safety with kids. I wrote these things down because I think it's important to make sure that we mention this and that people think about it. Is obviously, parents, it starts with you, with your kids when you're talking about firearm safety, is that you've got to figure it out. You've got to learn yourself. And like I said earlier, is that it's better that you gun-proof your kids instead of kid-proof your guns. I firmly believe that. Don't leave. This is like a no-brainer. It should be common sense, but unfortunately, every day it's proven that it isn't common sense. Is don't leave your damn guns laying around. Okay. Kids are curious. They're going to touch it. They're going to want to grab it, all that kind of stuff. So just don't leave them out laying around. And then think about the storage. Like I was saying earlier, is that if you're a kid and you're 4 feet tall, 3.5 feet tall, you got to start thinking about where you put stuff and where your storage is of those to make it a little bit less accessible for those kids. And obviously it's your responsibility as a new gun owner to prevent unauthorized use of your firearm, period. Doesn't matter whether it's kids or it's some other, ignorant adult that has no clue with guns that is screwing around with a gun and they accidentally shoot somebody at your house. So it's your responsibility. And I think that the rules to be, if I was to tell you that there's 4 rules that you need to teach your kids, is if they come across a firearm, they see a firearm, somebody with a firearm, is the first thing is stop, don't screw around, don't touch it, leave the area, and tell an adult. Those are the basic things that we should be teaching our kids, period, about guns.
Yeah, and again, going back to that, just leaving your gun around, lying around everywhere. If you go right now, go on your Ring app or go in your Nextdoor app and go and look and see how many people are going into cars and they're just checking car doors. That's all they're doing. They're checking car doors. They find them open at 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, and people are leaving guns in there. That's how criminals are getting guns. So again, negligence, right? We talked about negligence and leaving your gun around. Leaving your gun around in a car at 1 o'clock in the morning with your doors unlocked is probably not a good thing. Same thing, look at the Ring app. How many people just go up to a front door and check to see if it's open, unlocked, or locked? And then you have your gun right there on the front with your keys. You're just laying it around. You're going to have your gun used against you? Again, it all boils down to either complacency, right, or negligence. They should go in their specific spot in the safe, right, or an easy access safe, which is, again, fingerprints, fast keypad numbers, all kinds of crazy stuff. And Jay can link all that stuff later down in the podcast and put it up there, stuff for sale. But really seriously start thinking about that stuff and stop leaving your guns around everywhere.
Exactly. Yep. Well, look, we've spent the first 20 minutes of this podcast talking, maybe 25 minutes, talking about safety. And so I'm going to tell you is that if you go to any firearms training class and they don't spend at least this much time talking about safety or more, then you probably need to question the training that you're getting, because I think that it's that important that we reinforce this stuff all the time. So I
used to remember when people were mad at us because we would spend an hour on it.
Yep.
And they're like, well, I don't understand why you have to hear this every time. And then we would just put that slideshow where the guy's got that round through his kneecap all the way out of his ankle.
Yep, exactly.
This is why.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter. And that was one of the, and I was going to go back and look it up, but one of our things is that there's a firearms accident where somebody gets shot with a firearm every 9 hours. Every 9 hours in America, somebody is shot. Doesn't mean they're killed, but they're shot. And so in the time that we would sit in one class somewhere in America, somebody shot themselves. That's why we talk about safety every time. So that's what everybody should be doing. So we'll move on from there. And I think that from safety is that we look at is that the number one, the next thing that people ask a lot that are new gun owners is like, well, what kind of gun should I get? Somebody who's a non-gun person goes to a gun type person and that's what they ask them. Well, what kind of gun should I get? And obviously, there's a lot of factors that go into it and we'll kind of touch on that. But I think a good place to start is just, if you're trying to figure out what kind of gun to get, is that you got to figure out what it is that you're going to be using that gun for. So are you going to be using it for home defense? Are you going to be carrying it concealed? Are you just using it to go plinking out in the desert? Or are you going to be thinking about getting into competition or something like that? So those things are kind of the things to think about. And if you're choosing it for, which in this case, I think most of the people that are new gun owners are not getting into competition. I'm going to go out on a limb here. What do you think, Mike?
Well, I just remember Joe Biden says to get a 12 gauge and shoot in the air. That's the only takeaway that I got from that. So,
jeez, let old Joe, let him be. Come on now.
I'm just going to have to uncork. So we went from one president that didn't understand the chair, right? He didn't understand the position. Like I get who he is and I'm fine with it, but he didn't understand how important the POTUS seat is, to a guy who literally is senile. If you don't understand, come on, folks, this guy is senile. I mean, if my granddaddy, my grandpappy, right, if he started whispering to me from across the room, I would be like, time to commit that guy. He's over the edge. Anyways, I'm sorry. I digress.
That was pretty cringeworthy. Was the whole
I mean,
thing.
he's the president of the United. Hold on, let me do it again. He's the president of the United States.
Okay, Mike, we're going to move on to the next topic.
All right, I'm sorry. It's one of those days.
We're going to talk about the type of guns now.
Is it?
It's going to be handguns, rifles, and shotguns.
Anyways, that's how ridiculous that was. But no, I mean, you're right. You're right. But let's get back to guns. But I think that when we're talking about, well, what are the type of guns that people are going to use? Is they're either going to use a handgun, they're going to use a rifle, which is either going to be which is probably not going to be bolt action. It's probably going to be semi-automatic. I suppose you could defend yourself if that's all you got. It could be lever action, right? But or it could be a shotgun where it's going to be pump or semi-automatic. But I think that ultimately you got to figure out what you're trying to do. If you're trying to defend yourself in your home, or if you're going to start carrying it with you wherever you go, because those may be two different types of guns, and you have to think a little differently. If it's in your house, having a holster and a belt and all that stuff, being comfortable with it all day long doesn't really matter because it's just in your house. But if you're going to be carrying it all day long in your purse or on your person or in a bag or something like that, you got to take some other things into consideration. So that matters. But since the majority of this in this particular episode, we're just going to talk about handguns instead of going into the whole rifle thing and shotguns. So the first thing to understand is that there's two types of hand. Well, I shouldn't say there's only two, but the two
You're
primary.
You're going to get all kinds of hate mail now.
I know. The two primary types of firearms, the handguns, are going to be revolvers and semi-auto. Because I think somebody said something about it, complained about it last time because I didn't bring up the freaking Derringer. I'm like, serious?
He must have been a gangster.
Yeah. I'm like, whatever, man. I mean, brother.
What about the cane gun? The cane gun, it's like its own little category.
Exactly.
For the record, if someone has one for sale, I would like to have a cane gun. I don't have one in my safe yet.
And please, if you have one of those, make sure to check out our Ghost Gun episode about NFA stuff before you go out and have a cane gun. Oh my gosh. So with those type of things, there's a couple of different types of actions. And I know, you got to be thinking about is that there's the most common one that I would say that's probably out there is going to be the striker fired. And those are going to be like your Glocks. If somebody said, hey, name 10 firearms, name 10 handguns, all you'd have to do is say Glock.
Yeah, and you can't. Those are nice because you can carry them through the airport because they don't get detected under the the scanners.
Oh my gosh! You get that started because they're polymer.
That's right.
They nobody can detect them ever. Yeah. So, anyways, those are striker fired guns. Then there's single action. Then there's single action only. Then there's double action, and then single action and double action. So we'll kind of get into what those things are so, we're not super confused on what that type of stuff. So let's start out with revolvers. Shall we, Mike?
I guess.
Okay. So Clint Eastwood, picture in your mind. Hey.
We're dating ourselves. You know that, right?
Yeah. I know. Clint Eastwood, spaghetti westerns, wah, wah, wah. What kind of gun did Clint Eastwood carry? Well, what type of gun, not necessarily the model, did Clint Eastwood carry in those type of movies?
Well, it depends on which one. I mean, are we going back, to those? I mean, the
spaghetti westerns.
Well,
the old West. Come on now.
44 Magnum. I don't know.
Well, no. You're getting off, and no. I'm talking about what kind of gun was it? What type of action was it?
Oh, the single action. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what you remember is that if you think of all those Westerns that are out there, sweeping the hammer with one hand and pressing the trigger with the other. And that's what those single action guns are, is that they're the old school revolvers. More than likely, there isn't going to be anybody out there that's going to be carrying concealed or defending their house with a single action. Now, if that's all you got, great. But there aren't going to be very many people that do. So
for the record, right? So you have to have the hammer cocked. The hammer has to be physically cocked by you, and then you must press the trigger to drop the hammer, and then you have to physically cock the hammer again.
Right. And so that is where, when you think about, well, what is single action, Jay, when you bring that up? And that's when you press the trigger, it only does one thing. one single action, and that is it fires the gun. It doesn't cock it. It doesn't do anything else. You have to cock it yourself, press the trigger, and then it fires. And so that's what those are. Now, the problem with those is that they're big guns. They're very slow, takes 2 hands to fire. And if you shoot all 5 or 6 rounds out of those guns, depending on what kind it is, it takes forever to unload and reload. Not practical in any way, shape, or form, in my opinion, for a self-defense gun.
Right. Now, for teaching, they're great.
Sure.
Because you only get one shot with a press, right? So if you're a new shooter, it's easy. It's great. It's a great gun to learn on.
Exactly. Yep. The next one is a double action revolver. And so these are the ones that are going to be most of them that are out there. And they are double action because now you press the trigger and it does 2 things. It fires it and it cocks it. And this is where but the thing is there's a super heavy trigger. So you got to squeeze because you're pulling the hammer back with the trigger and then you're releasing it and letting it fire. So those are going to be, the majority of revolvers that you see out there are going to be double action. Any comment on that, Mike?
Nope, I agree.
No, you agree. So here's the cool thing about those type of things: revolvers, double action revolvers. There's some very good positives to those. Very reliable, super simple to use. You just grab it. You can they're not really sensitive, so it's like you don't have to worry about if you bump it, it goes off type of thing. They're safe. They're reliable. Most of them are going to be larger calibers. They're starting to make them now where they get into the smaller calibers. The only problem with the solid frame revolvers is that they transfer a lot of the recoil, especially when they make them in the featherlight type of guns where that recoil goes into your hands. So they're a little bit tougher to manage than a semi-automatic. They got a real heavy trigger press. Limited capacity, slower to reload. Those are some of the cons about revolvers. But they have made some nice changes to them now to where that hammer spur, they've shaved that off, so it's a little bit easier to conceal. It doesn't snag on your garment or in your purse or something like that. And then they also have the captured hammer spur where there's nothing exposed. So it makes it truly a double action only because you can't do anything with the hammer at all.
Yeah, and some people might ask, well, I don't understand what's the advantage of that. They're slower to reload, they're limited capacity. Well, if all you're trying to do is get away, right, you don't have to worry about a tap rack like on a semi-auto. If you have a problem with a revolver, you just pull the trigger again, right, and hopefully you get a bang instead of a click.
Yep. Exactly right. So those are the 2 types of revolvers. Single action, is one press of the trigger, one action happens, it just fires. And then the double action is where you press the trigger and it cocks it and fires it. So those are going to be your revolvers. Now, when you get into the semi-autos, the actions are going to be somewhat similar. So the first one we talked about, which is your striker fired guns, which is going to be the ones that are going to be hammerless. It's going to be a flat back on the back of the gun. You're not going to see anything because all of that stuff is internal in the slide. So my question to you, Mike, and maybe you can explain it in a way that is easy to understand, is a striker fired gun single action or double action?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Good answer.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So we don't need to get too confused about whether or not it's there's going to be a lot of different camps because, you're just pressing the trigger. It's a single action option, action. But because of the way it works with the safety inside and all that type of stuff is that people will argue that it may be double action.
Yeah. I mean, really technically, right. It's sitting at a half cocked position, and you're finishing the cocking motion. So yeah, it gets muddied.
Right. But all you need to worry about when you're thinking about the striker fired guns is that it has no hammer anywhere. It's going to be on the back. It's going to be a flat back to it. These are really super simple guns. As well, is that basically you just pick the gun up if it's loaded, one's in the chamber, magazine's in, you just pick it up, you just press the trigger until it's out of ammo. It's pretty much that straightforward. And to me, the reason that those are great guns is that under stress, you don't have to worry about all the other things that are on all the other types of guns. It's just you pick it up and it fires. Anything I'm missing on that one, Mike?
No, I mean, again, we can get into the weeds and then we could spend 5 hours on this subject. You know, everyone always says, oh, the Glocks don't have any safeties. Well, actually, it does have an external safety. It's on the center of the trigger there. You have to depress the center part of the trigger. That is technically an external safety. It also has 2 internal safeties. So that's what makes them so safe. I mean, you could literally use that thing as a hammer and it's not going to go off.
Right. And that's the good thing to know is that if you do have one of these striker fired guns and you drop them there, that's the way they're designed makes them drop safe. So when they hit the ground, they're not going to go off. But, you know, the external, when they're talking about the safeties is, yeah, it's in the trigger and you have to put your finger on it properly and you have to press the trigger correctly in order for it to fire. You can't just come in at the bottom part of the trigger and just pull on it. It just doesn't work that way.
Or so a gazunta goes in there, and that's why it's important to know gazuntas.
Yes, exactly. Is that if you get something jammed in there, if it isn't, it has to be perfectly on the trigger in order for it to pull back. And so you have these layers of safety on these, even though they don't have what appears to be an external safety like on some other guns. You know, it's still a safe gun. Been carrying a Glock for a long time, and don't have any issue with those. You know, with the draw and holstering, however it's concealed, whether it's appendix or 4 o'clock or, you know, in a duty rig, it doesn't matter. I've completely feel confident that those guns are safe and you have no issues. And so I think everybody else should as well. The next one is the single action only. Now, these are going to be what you're going to hear is the 1911s. And to me, these are kind of like the Ferrari of guns. I mean, they're awesome. 1911s are super nice to shoot. There's many really great things about 1911s.
You can get them in gold.
Yeah.
With diamonds.
Yeah, exactly. I think Pablo Escobar probably had a bunch of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the difference about these is that when you're looking at them is, and if you go back to one of our episodes is that Walt Longmire, he carried a 1911, and so does Magnum PI. So there you go.
And so therefore, because you've watched Magnum PI, you can fly helicopters.
Exactly. And I know how to drive a Ferrari in Hawaii.
Do you know that Magnum PI, random fact here, Magnum PI was really, really tall?
He was.
I met Tom Selleck, actually.
Did you? I did. Yeah. Oh. And what you said he ran a vacuum? What are you saying?
No, what?
I don't know. It sounded like you said he ran a vacuum. I don't know.
Vacuum. Well, I don't know. I don't think he ever ran a vacuum.
Okay. I don't know what you were talking about then.
What did I say? I don't know. Maybe I am too drunk. Maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. Who knows? But at any rate, single action only. One press of the trigger and the hammer falls. That's it. That's all you do. And so it's single action only in the fact that you don't cock the trigger. You don't, cock the trigger, cock the hammer, right? The slide does that. So, so when you see it and the hammer is forward on a 1911, nothing happens when you press the trigger. It doesn't cock the gun and then fire. You have to rack the slide for that hammer to go back, and then that's how it fires. So that's a manual process. So if the hammer's forward and you don't rack the slide, it isn't going to go off. So, but it does cock it each time you fire, right? And so the other thing that it has on there is that it does have an external safety. So once that thing has been cocked and it's ready to be fired, is that you're going to have to actually deactivate that safety so you can actually fire it. And so that's one of those things is that you also then have to, before you put it away, is that you're going to actually have to engage that safety again. Right, Mike?
Yeah. So if you're a new shooter, this is not the gun for you. 1911s take probably, I would say, 3 to 4 times the amount of time that a DA that a Glock style gun, a striker style gun would take. Because again, just like Jay's saying, that safety has to come on and off at the correct time that you pull the firearm out of its holster and point it at whatever it is you're pointing it at. There's a lot to go in there. And when you're under a butt ton of stress, it's just going to kill you. It's going to get you killed if you don't have hours and hours and hours behind that gun.
Right. And not only that, but then you also have the grip safety in there, is that the way you grip the gun is now you have to get the right firing grip. You have to sweep a safety. And then you have a super, super light trigger on there. So again, goes back to the point about you should never have your finger on the trigger. And any of these things that happen, whether you lose your balance or somebody startles you or that sympathetic grip, it doesn't take much to let that hammer fall on a 1911. And if you are not following all the safety rules and pointing in a safe direction and aware of your target and your surroundings, something bad could happen. And it's a great gun. It's fantastic. I think they're awesome, but it's just a little bit too complicated, I think, for somebody who's going to be first time owning a gun. It's probably something, those single action only is probably something you should steer away from.
Well, that's one of the first things I've always heard. People say, well, I shoot the 1911 so good. I go, well, you're actually cheating yourself. The reason why you shoot it so good is because of that light trigger press, and you don't have good fundamentals for everything that comes with shooting a gun.
Right. Yep, that's for sure. Now, the next one that comes up is going to be a double action, single action. And so you say, well, how can it be both? Well, because the gun changes from the first round to the second and all the following rounds after that. So in a double action, single action gun is you're going to have one that the first trigger press is going to be double action, which means that it is going to, by pressing the trigger, it's going to cock it, and then it's also going to fire it. Consequently, when it's set up that way, and that's what you have to do, is that first trigger press is really heavy. And then once it's fired and that slide cycles back, it then cocks the gun for you. So then all the other follow-up shots after that are all going to be single action, which is all you do is you press it and it fires. And as a result, the trigger press is going to be a lot lighter. So you have to be expecting that it's going to be, a little bit different trigger press from one to the next, and it's going to be heavier. It's not going to be lighter, all those type of things. Typically, this is going to be like a military or law enforcement type of gun. Doesn't mean that civilians can't have them and you can't use them for personal protection and concealed carry. Not saying that at all, but primarily that's kind of where it came from. So the ones that come to mind is going to be the Beretta, which is what the Marine Corps carried, the 92, and that is, it's a great gun. I love it, and that's going to be a double action, single action type of gun. It's going to usually have a decocker and a safety. And so when you press that decocker, the hammer falls forward and then you engage the safety. And then again, once you fire that and that slides, it cocks the gun. Then you have to decock it, has to be safe. Or the way I carry those is that I carry it where it's not down on position, which down on position is where it's the safety is engaged, decock safety is engaged. And then when you pull out of the holster, you got to sweep that safety in order to fire. But you can carry it a different way, which is you can have it where the safety is already swept. It's a personal preference. And so when you put it in the holster, it's already that way. So you don't have to sweep it when you pull it out of the holster, but it's still going to be a double action pull. A heavier first trigger press. And then everything is single action after that. But you just have to think about that is that you can't, you'll see a lot of times people when they're decocking a gun, they'll ride the hammer forward. In these particular guns, you can't do that because it's still going to be set up to fire. So you actually have to use the decocker and it's just going to be a big click and that hammer is going to come down. So for just explaining it, if you're confused in the way that we're explaining it, that's pretty much how those guns are. So
don't buy one.
Saying is that under stress, there's a lot of stuff to remember. You got a decocker, you got a safety, you got a sweep, you got double action on the first one, and then you got single action. I got to use two different trigger pulls, and then before I put it away, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. There's there's a lot going on with those guns. They're safe. They're very safe. They're reliable guns. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just there's a lot of stuff to do, and I think that when we're talking about, to me, is that as soon as you add, and I guess the overall to, and I'm not saying one over the other because I have all of them, and there's great things about all of them. But what I'm saying, when you're going to, and Mike, you can jump in anytime on this, is that I think is that the more variables that you put into your personal defense firearm, the more likely it is that something is going to go wrong. And so the more you can have it simple and easy, the better off you're going to be, especially under stress and in the dark.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with. Again, this all goes back down to what it is that you want out of this tool, right? So if you're going to have a farm and you want to do acres and acres of produce, right? Are you going to buy a hoe and you're going to go out there and do it, or are you going to buy a tractor that has multiple tines, to plow? Sorry, the terminology is not with me because I don't farm. So again, same thing with a gun, right? So if you want the gun to put it in the safe, to leave it there just in case, get something simple. Get something that has a lot of bullets. Again, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I will be. If you don't train with it, you need a lot of bullets because you're going to have a bunch of flyers. There's going to be a lot of liability. Oh, by the way, you will talk that later on in another cast. But I mean, you have to have a lot of little, good dudes out of your gun coming out to stop the threat. If you kind of want to practice, and you kind of want to keep it concealed, and you kind of want to have reliability, you don't want to learn tap rack, sure, get a revolver, right? But again, very limited in numbers. So you really do have to understand and weigh how much time you're going to spend into this. If this is going to become a hobby and you like it, then cool. Yeah, get something, something simple first, start out slow, and then, get into the other fun stuff. And they are. I mean, to me and Jay and all the guys that we know and we hang out with, I mean, that's the reason why we do this. We do this not to charge millions of dollars to our customers. We do it because it's a hobby. I mean, that's why we did what we did with the sheriff's office, because it was fun for us. And that's why we always got rave comments like, man, you guys really know your stuff. Well, that's because we really love it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that if the gun becomes more complicated and then it's less enjoyable, then you're not going to train with it. And I think, that's when you got to take these things into consideration, is that a double action, single action gun is great. There's a lot of super benefits for it. And there's a lot of, I think that a lot of those guns are really sexy. I think they look good. But they're more complicated, and so you want to go with something that if you're not going to be out there all the time, and you're not going to be doing a ton of dry firing and practicing with that on how to draw and how to manipulate and do all those things, then it's just going to create an issue for you, and it's not going to be reliable in the way that you want it to be in that, high stress situation when you need it to just go bang. I mean, really, that's the way it is. So to me, I think you got to look at those things between those guns, is that you can tell that as we went down the list, they got a little bit more complicated, and that's truly, how you got to look at those guns from there. So the one thing I do want to point out, however, about any of these guns that I think is important for you all to remember, is that yes, these guns have safeties. However, to steal a Mikeism, they are mechanical, and anything mechanical can and will fail, and it'll probably fail at the worst possible moment. So when we're talking about safety, just because it has a safety on it doesn't mean that the safety rules go out the window. You have to still continue to respect and honor the safety rules, even though a gun has a safety. Period.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mic drop, whatever you want to call it. So we get down to the last couple of things here, and this is to me, is that you say, okay, so now what do I choose? what kind of gun do I choose? We kind of talked about the actions, how they are, what they are. So I'm going to say I'm going to kind of some recommendations on my side. Mike, you make your recommendations as we go, and I'm not going to get into brands or kinds. I'm just going to tell you these are our recommendations on the things that you, as the new shooter, going out to get a gun and thinking about purchasing a gun, these are the things you need to take into consideration. So I'm going to give you a second to go get a piece of paper and a pen, not a pen gun, a pen, and so you can write this stuff down. And so the first thing is that, when we talked about this in one of our previous podcasts, is that most criminals that are out there we would say that probably the most popular round right now is the 9mm, and I think that it's everywhere. And I would say is that the last thing you want to do is, okay, let me back up, and I'll get back to my whole thing about how many 9mm are out there. But my point is, write this down. It should be as large and as powerful as you can shoot accurately. Another mic drop. So if you go out and you get a 10mm and it's this huge round with super power and you cannot shoot it accurately, what's the point? Somebody's going to get on top of you. They're going to take your gun away from you. You're going to miss every time, and they're going to turn that gun and they're going to use it on you. So I think that that's an important thing. It's got to be you handle a caliber that you can shoot accurately all the time. Right, Mike?
Yeah, go ask the FBI, right? So that's where they started. They started at the 10mm because it was the biggest and the best, right? As times changed and they allowed women into the academies and the women couldn't handle it, in their infinite wisdom, they dropped down to the 40 cal, which was way worse. And then eventually they ended up at the 9mm, which is where they are today.
Right. And so I guess my point about the 9mm is that I always think is that if you need to be carrying a caliber that is at least what everybody else, what those people, those bad guys are going to be out there carrying. Just my opinion. But I think that when we're talking about as large and as powerful as you can shoot accurately, the power is one thing, but the size is another, because remember, if you're going to be carrying it concealed, then it needs to be concealable, and it also needs to be comfortable to carry. So, you don't want this big, huge 44 Magnum. It's pretty hard to carry, and it weighs 6 pounds or whatever on your hip. But if you're at your home and you're just defending your home, then maybe, a larger gun that's more comfortable for you to shoot accurately, maybe that's not as much of a consideration. Okay, the next one is, here's the thing to remember, is that all guns are not the same. They may look like it somewhat, but they're not the same. So all the grips that are on these guns, they're all different sizes. And so you have to find the one that fits your hand. The cool thing nowadays is that a lot of the manufacturers out there are selling these guns with grips that you can interchange. So you can make them very thin, or you can make them much bigger for bigger hands. So that's a great feature, is if you can find a gun that has interchangeable grips, that'll help you to be able to kind of dial it in, if you will, instead of trying to find one that, trying to find the one that has exactly the right grip. Kind of my thoughts on what they're doing now with those guns.
Yeah, that interchangeable grip system is awesome. I really liked the Walther back in the day, because I believe they were one of the first ones to start doing that. And I had a Walther P99 and 40 cal flavor. And the reason why I was able to shoot that gun accurately was because it did have those grip changes, and I was able to get the one that was perfect for my hand.
Right. Yep. No, that's exactly right. And I think that one of the things too is, when you think about this, is that if you're a small person, it's going to be, even a medium-sized gun is going to be harder for you to hide on your person, just because of the size of the gun. But if you're a bigger person, you got a little bit more real estate to kind of cover this thing up and conceal it. But, as you're a smaller person, it becomes a little bit more difficult. The range and selection you're gonna be on a different side of the counter because you have to find the medium to small size guns. So you want to make sure that one fits your body type too. This is the one that I see probably have seen the most often in classes. Is if you, whatever gun it is that you get, you must be able to manipulate the controls on that firearm. And you've got to be able to do it with one hand and with your weak hand. If you can't do it weak-handed, one-handed, and certainly if you can't do it with both hands, then that gun is not for you. You have to be able to have that hand strength to be able to rack the slide and lock it back. You have to be able to push the buttons to pull your magazine out. You have to be able to push the button down to let the slide go forward. There's a lot of things that you have to be able to do with your hands with that gun that you need to be able to manipulate those controls. And if you can't do that, then in an emergency, when you need to be able to do it, you're behind the power curve at that point.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of women struggle with 9mm. Sometimes a slide, they can't, rack that slide to the rear, and they'll have like their husbands do it for them. I'm like, no. You have to figure out a way to get this done or to lock the slide to the rear. I see a lot of people struggle with that too.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's not just a woman thing. It can be your age. It can just be, you just don't have big, strong hands. I mean, I don't know, if you're just new to it and you've, have not had to use your hands in that way to have good grip strength. I mean, it's just going to be difficult. So maybe it's not the gun for you and you need to look at something else.
Yeah.
So the next one that I would say here is that without saying, it has to be accurate. And when I was thinking about this, I was like, I don't know how many times I said, well, I've heard somebody say, well, I think the sights are off, or I think it's my ammunition. Okay. Without saying, it has to be accurate. And I would say that to me, accurate is defensively accurate, which is you should be able to cover all of the holes that you put in that paper from 7 yards with your hand. And that's defensively accurate to me. And so, you should be able to do that. And I think most guns that you get from that are new out of the box, they're all going to be accurate. And I would challenge, and Mike has done that plenty of times, both Mike and I, when somebody says that it's not accurate, I think the sights are off. It's, what happens there, Mike?
Yeah, we have a little challenge day or time. I always like saying that we have good news and bad news. What would you like to hear first? The good news is that your gun is awesome. The bad news is that you suck at shooting.
That was always my favorite. Oh my gosh, that's too funny. Yep. And you just get up there and you grab their gun right out of there. They'd just be yelling about how inaccurate it is. And you just say, let me see that goddamn thing. You just grab it and bam, one. I'm aiming for that little guy on the target at the top right there. See him? Boom, gone. Here you go. Have your gun back. It's accurate as hell. You just don't know what you're
I wouldn't
doing.
even tell them I was aiming at that guy. I would just shoot it and they'd be like, see, you missed. I'm like, no. Top left target.
Yeah.
That's not the target. That's the logo. Exactly.
Right. But that gets back to it is that, you have to be accurate with it. And so the gun has to be accurate and you have to have a gun that you can handle that allows you to be accurate because, hey, if you can't hit the target, what's the point? That's really what it is. So
you might scare them to death.
Right. That's possible. And then I get into, we've kind of talked about a little bit about the caliber. And I think it goes back to select the largest caliber that you can be accurate with. Don't just jump up to the big dirty hairy. If it's a 380, if it's a smaller caliber gun, because you can manage that recoil, then that's a gun for you. Just don't let people convince you that you have to carry the mighty 45. Or you got to carry 9mm because that's what my brother and my sister and my husband and my uncle and my buddy and this carries a 9. You need to carry what works for you because in that moment, it's you that has to do it. So it has to work for you, not other people. So keep in mind is that the bigger the round, the bigger the bullet, the more recoil you're going to be feeling. So you need to, kind of think about that stuff. And so in this case, bigger is not always better. when we're talking about being able to be accurate is you need to be, we always hope that it only takes one round, and that first round should be the most accurate round that you fire. However, not always is one round enough to stop a threat. So you have to be able to follow up with additional rounds. So you need to be able to get back out on your sights on that sight alignment onto that target. So you want to make sure that you can do those follow-up rounds. We can get into a debate, and we're going to talk about ammo in another episode about delivered energy and which ones, have the largest wound channel and penetration and all that kind of stuff, and how much of them, retain their weight and all. The reality is that most of these are really, really close. Most calibers are really, really close. So I think you're going to be okay. Accuracy is more important, and the right type of ammo is going to be more important than making sure that you have the biggest one that's out there. Because I think bullet placement, if I'm not mistaken, a bullet right where it needs to be is better than one that you missed.
Absolutely.
And finally, is that if it hurts your hands and you don't like to shoot it because it's too powerful, that translates into me is you're never going to practice with it. And you don't practice with it, what good is it, right?
Yeah, it goes back to what we said earlier. I mean, if you're going to spend all of 2 minutes shooting at the range and then, the gun hurts me, but at least I can hit the paper, then that's not the gun for you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think ultimately at the end of the day, when you go through all these things that we talked about, Mike, I think is that you have to, I think one of the final selections has got to be, it's got to be a reputable brand. If the gun store has parts, if it's accessories available for it, those are the type of things that you want. You don't want, something that nobody else has heard of. I think that the reputable brands that have good support, because there's some really good guns that are out there that have a high price tag, but they don't have people available at a lot of the gun stores to even work on them. And, that was, that's just the truth on some of these brands. So you have to be able to know that there's somebody that can work on it when you have an issue, and they're going to be there to support it when you buy it.
Yep, absolutely. Again, you buy something like Jay said, that 1911 that's super exotic, and you have to pull 10,000 pins to get at the problem. It's going to be a price tag to do maintenance on, versus a Glock where you pull 3 pins and the entire gun falls apart.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, Mike, we covered, again, I'm surprised. It's so quickly. I look over here and see how long we've been doing this, and we covered a tremendous amount of territory in about an hour and 15 minutes, which, we usually try to stay around an hour. But this one I think that it was important to cover a lot of the safety stuff and kind of get some of that stuff out of the way for these new gun owners. So, I would encourage anybody is that if you have any questions, if you have any comments, make sure to throw it up in the show notes and the comment section, the comment sections of this podcast. If we post it up on Facebook, you can put it in the comments of that post. If you have any questions, you don't want to do it publicly, and you say, hey, I didn't understand what you're saying about this, shoot us an email, podcast@laytonforce.com, and we'll try to answer those. We can, respond in an email, or we can answer them in the next show or something like that. So we're here to make it as easy as possible for you. We're probably not going to recommend, Mike, I don't know about you, but probably not going to recommend brands, but we'll certainly recommend, the things that should make that decision easier for you, for sure.
Yeah, trying to recommend a brand for anybody is never going to work. You have to go to the ranges. They rent guns there. Most ranges, go shoot them all. Go to ladies' night. That way, if you're a lady, you can shoot as many as you want for free. And then I think usually you only have to buy the ammo and stuff like that. But go shoot them all. Don't shy away from anyone. Figure it out. Go to classes. Again, go to good classes. Go, if you're in Arizona, hit up DCS. Those guys are great. And in Nevada, maybe Jay can recommend some people. If you're in Texas, drop us an email. I have several friends out there that will be happy to give you a class.
Yeah, that's always the case. Is if you're trying to find something, you want a recommendation, always send us an email, and we're happy to respond and get you in touch with the people that we think will help you out the best. So, but yeah, and Mike, unless you got anything else, I think we've consumed enough of our very loyal listeners' time.
I'm surprised anyone's still listening.
Hello, are you still there?
Hello.
Hello. Is everybody still there? All right. Well, hey, we appreciate everybody sticking with us through this one and joining us. And again, if you got any questions, just reach out to us, and we will continue on. And our next episode will be part 2 on this. Where I think what are we talking about this next one, Mike? Do you remember what it is?
I believe it was the different flavors of Crown and what mixers to use. So then.
No, actually, I think we're going to talk about trainers and teachers, trainers versus teachers and drills and those type of things. So how do you select the right drills to do, and how do you gear and some of that stuff? So that should be a good episode. So make sure to stick around and check out the next episode, huh?
All right.
Okay. Now you got to be here, so you have no choice. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll catch you on the next one.
Peace out.
And that'll be a wrap for this episode of the Leighton Forest Prepared Defensive Action Podcast. Be sure to give us a follow on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, or visit our website, www.leightonforest.com, so you can get all the latest info from Leighton Forest. If you have any comments or questions on this episode, or if you have a suggestion for a future show, you can reach us by shooting an email to podcast@leightonforest.com. On behalf of Mike Garza and myself, thank you for joining us. Be safe, and as always, stay in the fight.
Peace out.